Episode 2, Crossings.
It was Tilly who first told me about the Yellow King. How he cast his magic over us, kept us safe and fruitful. I was 8 and she was 10. Even then, she had a way of looking at you like you were some sort of exotic pet that could speak 5 languages and shoot fire out its nose. I wasn't that special, of course. She was, and damn if I didn't keep that reflection to myself. Most summers we'd take my father's rowboat down to the lake and net bass. Tilly watched them flop around the bottom boards, mesmerized, and I hung over the gunwale. Those fish might have been proud to know she was their life's final witness on this earth. I'm in no hurry to tell more about her. My design is my own, and pieces go away in the sharing. All you need do is imagine your own native flora pressed between the pages of a book. When the turn came, I spent the first week holding my breath and the second week catching it. There was poison in the ground, ash in the air. No one knew why or how long it would last, but I remembered. I saw what it meant and what must have happened. My father was not a great believer. He was no sort of thinker one way or another, which made plenty of room in him for mirth. Mr. Reese had secured him a private cabin on his property, and that seemed to go above and beyond what we expected of the man. The illness that took him had moved in with relish. It was quick and ambitious, and yet, for all that, my father managed to spend most of what he'd made on the sale. Out it went to his gambling debts and his alcohol, not always in that order, while I tried to keep things churning at home. Part of my arrangement involved a hired hand by the name of Lucas. Lucas was barely beyond his teenage years, or so I gathered, and with the loss of the crops and the general cloud hanging over my endeavors, there wasn't much for the kid to do but darn sweaters and smoke pipes. I caught him coming out of my bedroom one evening, pinched a look on his face, said he'd misplaced a button. I asked, which one? And he said, small and brown, and then off he went, in sideways fashion, checking the floor and his pockets, and me in the hallway mirror. This was what Mr. Reese was paying for, and I reckoned it was only fair that I pay him a visit and let him know.
I stood on his left. The scar was on his right, and I could see he was shy about it. The wind whipped his coat. I heard the trees bend and creak like the wood of an old ship, or how I imagined that would sound. We were up some 1,700 feet, and if you planted yourself and angled your body just right, you could sort of hover there, all of Barthos in your eyes. But it was cold. Colder than it used to be, and the sky was the color of bone. He said it was up to me where we went, him being so new and all. Maybe he regretted that now. I mean, I never really dated. We all knew each other's business, and my pedigree made people nervous. Not to say I didn't get around or have certain intentions. The idea of settling down, though, baking pies, shopping, sleeping, living together. Frida tried it, and the side effects almost killed her. I pointed at Mount Green and asked if he'd been over there.
Well past it, in fact.
He'd come that way by truck, along High Ridge Road and through the turnpike. There was rain in St. Simons and fire in Reno. A band of robbers tried to steal his hubcaps near a town I'd never heard of. But that didn't stop him. Just the opposite, in fact. I figured we were on separate tracks. Him arriving and me set to leave. The problem was I should have gone when I could afford to. I had will and reason, but no plot. That's Barthos, though. It always finds a way to keep you. When the Yellow King disappeared and people started pointing fingers, I lost half my business. The ones who did come were paying with seeds and figurines they'd whittled out of soap and bark, but I couldn't turn them down. They were fucking desperate to know, and I needed to tell them, to make the effort anyway. My progressions were foggy. Everyone was coming through with fractions and weird enjambments. All the measures were bent. I had to talk around things, add color. I felt like a total fraud, like a machine in some basement that the owner forgot to flick off. If I'd known then, you ask, that Cornell and I would lose each other, that everything we built would be torn down, rubbed away, save one. Should I jump? Should he? The years move through us with a needle and thread, in one side and out the other, pushing and tugging over and over. And I realize now that I hadn't read his future. I'd read his past. All his travels were stitched inside him. So there I am, my brain buzzing and my mouth shut, wondering what to do next. Cornell turned and showed me his face. I guess he saw where I was gazing, not below, but beyond, because he smiled and took my hand.
Do you like squash?
The best squash he'd ever had was grown right here in the soil of my mother's and grandmother's. Couldn't be beat, he said. And my heart hurt then because I believed him. He was a good listener. As good a listener as he was an eater, which is saying something. I tried not to take advantage of his kindness. Even when he proposed, I gave him a minute to think about it. He said he didn't want a minute. He wanted the rest of my life.
The past isn't a mirror. It's a door. I was about 8 months from graduating secondary, that liminal space between words when, if you understood how sentences worked, you could predict with some clarity what was coming next. But most of us are just talking. My friend Suze was in almost every class with me. If we were awake, we were probably together, studying, gossiping. I'd never known anyone so completely devoted to her research, to getting to the bottom of an idea and lifting it back up for the rest of us to poke at. She made me look like a drunk mule. Suze had a problem, however, by the name of Jeremy John. Jeremy was a quiet, passingly handsome kid who wore a black wool suit each and every day of his life. And Jeremy loved Suze. I don't mean he had a schoolboy crush on her. I mean he'd constructed an entire adult landscape featuring Suze as his wife. He'd pull out chairs for her, rearrange her books, and he did it all with a kind of polite boredom as if they'd been married for decades. Suze would scream at him, which broke her chain of thought, the one thing she valued above all else. Jeremy would just take a step back and wait for the scene to reset. Things would have gone on this way but for the fact that Suze discovered Jeremy's secret. The secret passed to me, of course, with the understanding that I'd keep it to myself, which I did. Who was there to tell, anyway? My mother? Tilly? No thanks. Jeremy's father was a jail keeper, and I was one of a very small handful who knew it. The fact that Jeremy had confided in Suze meant that he'd broken his family's oath, an oath of anonymity. Now, Jeremy hadn't asked to be his father's son any more than I'd asked to be a Harkham. And as I said, he was deep into a 25-year relationship with the mother of his non-existent children, one of whom would be told to carry on the tradition. You can guess what happened then. Suze convinced Jeremy to take us down, past the locked gates and the dead ends and the booby traps, into the cell of the Yellow King himself. It was the field trip to end all field trips, primary research, the stuff legends are made of. Even if she'd never be able to admit what we'd done.
My banker said I was going too far. Why marry her? Why not just buy her dinner? Sunday fucks like the other ones. It's his job to be cautious. People are measuring cups. They're born with about this much oil or grease or whatever they need to wake up. Then they start getting filled. A quarter cup of lighter fluid, 2/5 bitter melon. Some things are poured out to make room for other things because there's only so much they can hold. If you play it right, you can change the ratios without them even noticing. That's how you wind up with 1,000 acres of farmland and a 20% gross margin, which is a process my banker will never understand. I have nothing against tradition. Tradition is there to be countervalued. It's the raw carrot waiting to be cooked. And Barthos was ready for the crock pot, all right. Tilly was too, even if she didn't know it. We both made something on the deal. I just made a little more than she did. Once I was part of that clan, I could write my own ticket. The town had faith in me, and their faith was a hand in the water, knowing there must be a boat up there somewhere. The pregnancy was a mistake. My plan was to delay that conversation as long as possible, and she didn't seem to be in a rush, not as far as I could tell. Still, it happened. The only thing to do was to act happy, which I was already doing, while I tried to figure out how to pull the trigger on phase 2. Cups and spoons. That's all there is to it.
He'd started sniffing 2 more plots east of the Delta, having only just arrived 6 months prior. Made no sense to us. But a starving person does not ask for recipes. He gives thanks for the crumbs. It was just about dinner time when I got there. His house was a split-level stone affair, and one of the oldest still standing. The cabin where my father now lived sat at the bottom of the drive, and that's as far as I got before I saw Tilly jogging down from the porch with a gingham napkin in her hand like some sort of remnant.
Oh, Einar. I'm so sorry.
The thing I noticed, the thing that held my attention, was a patch of yellow daffodils. They had a scent you could almost eat. How they grew, I didn't know. Not there, not now, but Reese had done it. And they stood with such fixity that all elsewise got tugged in and devoured. This, even as her swollen belly passed my view for the first time, even as she told me my father was dead, that it was swift, that they tried to reach me and were about to come looking. And the oven, she'd forgotten the oven, and the council was called and arrangements would have to be made. Mr. Reese emerged from the cabin. He bowed his head a little. Tilly flashed her blue gingham, and in I went. It was small. Smaller than it looked from the front because the ceiling sloped down. I'd only been there once before to deliver a jacket and gloves. The jacket was lined with fleece, and it hung on a hook next to the door, untouched. He was too tall for the cot. Someone had pulled a sheet over his head, and his naked feet reached over the edge in protest. I didn't say anything. I was still thinking about those daffodils out there on their own when I couldn't even get grass to grow. I never did ask about the kid, Lucas, but I knew he'd been sent to spy on me in the house that wasn't mine anymore.
You've been listening to Saturn's Return by Chance Mulick, directed by Melanie Armour. Music and sound design by Chad Rains, featuring Karen Grenke as Frida Harcum, Jason Howard as Cornell Reese, Robin Kurtz as Tilly Harcum, and Mark Lindberg as Einar Geld. Saturn's Return was produced by Nerve Tank Media. This project was commissioned by David Vining and made possible with support from the Putnam Arts Council, the Governor's Office of New York, and the New York City Artist Corps.